Okay, welcome. Today is September 21st, 2020, and we've been at this over 3 weeks to learn from anywhere. And I'd like to welcome you to this QM222 section D1. And what we're going to do today is we're going to start on visualization, the idea of graphic. Real quick question, can everyone hear me who's remote? Can everyone see me? Thank you very much. Just a real quick announcement. Next Monday's class is moved. Next Monday's class will happen, it's on the syllabus on the very first page. It will happen on Sunday. It will happen only online. And it will happen from 12:20 to 1:10, which is the same time as the other section, D1 meet. Monday happens to be Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is one of these days where people who are Jewish, that's me, basically say to God, all right, I was miserable last year, don't kill me next year, okay? So I'll be sitting all day in services going, oh, I was so bad, make me better. So we're going to have class on Sunday. For those of you who don't want to go to class on Sunday, the class will be recorded. It'll be up on the web on the class website, hopefully before the holiday starts. So if you just want to watch it on Monday, feel free. Okay, so there's no class Monday. It's moved virtually on Sunday, and I'll see you next week on Wednesday and everything. The one-day holiday. It's a great holiday. Fast for 25 hours. No water, no food, and just sit there and reflect all day. It's even worse this year because it's all on Zoom.
Will attendance be taken on Sunday?
Attendance will be taken by me, and I will give 100% to everybody, whether you show up or not. So you don't have to show up on Sunday. You could watch it on tape. You can do whatever you want. We give everybody a free pass. Any questions before we begin? Great. So where are we right now? Let me share a screen real quick. This is our class website. And on our class website, we're under resources. And today what we're going to be doing, we just did advanced Excel, we did pivot tables last time. Today we're doing lecture 6 down the very bottom, data visualization. And for the data files, hopefully I can get to it. We're going to look at last score. Last score is a great data file. It talks to people who are in committed relationships. It doesn't necessarily have to be husband, wife. It could be any kind of committed relationship, and asks, how often do you laugh with your partner? All right? How often do you have a good time? Enjoy each other. So we'll take a look at that hopefully at the end. So let me stop sharing and bring up the slides. Bring up the slides. And let me know if remotely you cannot see QM222 data visualization. The screen sharing has stopped, but the shared window is closed. Did you lose the slides? Can you see the slide? They can't see the slide, all right? Trying to figure out, share a screen. Can you see the slides now? Great. So if you've actually had the ability to go into some professor's office in Questrom, this is actually the graph the picture that I've seen in most professor offices. I think there's 2 or 3 in Questrom already. This is one of the world's most famous graphs. Now, our goal in the next few days is to teach you how to do great graphs. I'm not expecting you to hit this sort of level where pretty much, there's 2 or 3 hanging up in various professors' offices, but you can always aim high. This is a graph that was done in the 1800s. Oh, real quick, if you're interested in graphing in any way, shape, or form, as a Yale professor named Edward Tufte, he actually, he's now emeritus. He's probably, I don't know, late 80s, maybe early 90s. But he goes around and gives seminars all over the world, all the time, about how to create incredible graphs. It is one of the most popular seminars available. One day, really good course. He's written probably about 50 books. Anyways, he basically says in one of his books, in the Visual Display of Quantitative Information in 2001, he says this is the world's greatest graph. And why is it a great graph? And what's it trying to show? It looks at Napoleon's march to Moscow and then Napoleon's subsequent defeat. And it crams a lot of information into a relatively small amount of space, but once you are able to decode it, I'm going to say that word a second time because it's going to be important in about 2 minutes. Decode, a lot of people remember the graph. So the whole idea of this lecture is 2 words: decode, remember. Decode means, what the heck am I looking at? Let me figure it out. And then remember is, if I ask you 2 weeks later, what's going on? Normally I'd run over and point at the blackboard, but that's going to be useless for all the people in Zoom land. So people in Zoom land, can you see my cursor on the screen? All right. So sometimes, forgive me for saying this, sometimes people on Zoom land are doing other things, Facebooking, playing games, things like that. So you just need to pay attention for about 45 seconds and actually watch visually. There's 2 lines here. What color on your screen is this? Is it kind of like, I don't know, olive color? Yeah, tan, whatever it is. There's a tan line and there's a black line. And what you see is the tan line represents how many men. So Napoleon started off with thousands and thousands of men here. And you can actually see the numbers, a little small. And then as he marches across Poland, you can even see some of the rivers, like some of these black lines. You can see some of the cities. He gets reinforcements. And as he's marching to Moscow, his men start dying off. And why do his men start dying off? You can actually see the temperature down here in the very bottom. And it has things like, this is all minus. So it's like -10, -20 Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So it's really, really cold. He gets to Moscow, and compare the width of this line to the size of his troops when he hits Moscow. He has lost well over 60% of his troops before the battle even begins. When he hits Moscow, he basically has a fair number of men, and then on the retreat home, pretty much almost everyone dies until you have this tiny, tiny thin line. Basically, Napoleon, his chief surgeon, and a couple of his other generals under him make it back. Almost everybody else in the campaign died of exhaustion, starvation, or cold, just froze to death. So, pretty interesting graph because you're able to put in geological features like rivers, political features like towns and borders. They also have temperature down here along the horizontal axis. But most importantly, people are like, wow, hundreds of thousands of men start out. And then here, I think it's about, I don't know, someone can actually read it. Feel free to shout out online if you can see it. It's like 5,000 men make it home out of almost 1 million who were engaged in the whole battle. Decode. What I just spent a few minutes doing is decoding this graph for you. And hopefully some of you will remember, wow, a lot of people started out, relatively few people made it back. And you can see a lot of that had to do with really cold temperatures. Questions? Anybody online have any questions? Any chats? So graphs, figures, charts, whatever you want to call them, they can convey a huge amount of information quickly, or I can put up a chart, not tell you much about it, and your entire audience can go, what the heck are we looking at? Get really confused, and when audiences get confused, they pull out their phones and they start playing, they start checking their messages, they start ordering lunch or dinner or something like that, and they stop paying attention to you. So the question today, the big question is, what techniques can we ensure to convey information instead of confusing your audience? What can we do to grab you and bring you in so that you're like, yes, I want to pay attention and listen to this person? So there's 2 steps. Step 1 is when people look at a graph or figure, they try and decode it. Now, some graphs are pretty easy to decode, and we're going to work our way through in about 20 slides. I'm going to show you some easy to decode graphs, and some graphs are really hard to decode. And then the second part is your brain then says, okay, I got to remember this information. So once you decode it and you say, this is important, you're like, I got to stick it in my head and try and remember it for a long time. So I'm going to set up some breakout rooms for a couple of minutes. For those of you in class, turn around, talk to your neighbors and things like that, just don't physically move. And the question is, have you ever been in a situation where you have to decode something and then remember it? Let me give you a quick personal example. So it could be a business example, it could be a personal example, it doesn't really matter what. And then we're going to go back and I'm going to ask a few of you who do not participate a lot to share. All right, so Ritvik, you're going to tell Ritvik, I'm interested in looking for some class contributions, some class participation points I want to share a little. Before COVID, my wife and I spent a lot of time traveling. Incredible amounts of time. 2 years ago, I counted up how many hotel days I had spent. I mean, days I had spent not in my own bed, but in a hotel. And 2 years ago, I had spent 3.5 months in hotels at various in that year. And last year was a kind of a light year. I only spent 2 months. Well, not before COVID, the 365. I spent 2 months in various hotel rooms around the world. And when you spend time in hotel rooms around the world, not all desk clerks speak English. Not all of them are able to convey what room you're in. And one of the things that I've often had difficulty is you get off a plane, you've now been on a plane like 18 hours, you can barely think straight, and somebody sort of speaks a little bit of English, or you sort of speak a little bit of, I don't know, Japanese or Mandarin or Spanish or wherever you are in the world, and you're like, hi, I want my room, give me my room. So you have to decode what the heck they're trying to tell you. And they're often trying to tell you things like, oh, the pool is open until 10 o'clock. And I'm like, just tell me my room number, okay? Oh, we have free breakfast, and this is on the 3rd floor. And I'm just like, okay, so you got to decode all that information, plus what they want from you, because every hotel wants something different. Sometimes they want your passport, sometimes they want your credit card, sometimes they want your firstborn. I mean, you don't know, okay? You have to decode all this standing there in front of the clerk when you're ready to fall asleep on your feet. And then you have to remember where the heck your room is. Now, sometimes it's very simple. They hand you a number like 404. But sometimes it's like, oh, you're in the West Wing and you have to ask the concierge to get you the golf cart and they're going to drive you over there. And it's like, oh, my goodness. So the code, and then you have to remember where the heck you're going. And for me, it's sometimes very, very hard. Personal story. Okay. So I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms right now. Sorry for boring you. And feel free in the class to turn. We'll give her about 3 or 4 minutes. And then we'll listen to some of your decode, remember. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Okay. Feel free to blame. This is a 2-day two-part holiday. So Rosh Hashanah is this weekend. And normally, I was president of the synagogue for many years. Thank God, not this year. I'm sorry for the president this year. But going to services on Zoom, I don't know if you've ever done anything religious. No, I mean, there also be other religions that have to do it. It's like, take a fair number of hours to do. I've been in Hindu temples, and I'm watching Hindu service on Zoom. Yeah, I don't know. So I guess it's just like this. I mean, it was just like I was sitting there and it was like this work. It's no different than like a Wednesday meeting on. It's just weird. And then we have so usually holidays, doesn't matter what religion, they're full family. So we had 6 tables in the backyard, all 8 feet apart. They're like, hi, how are you? That's so great. So, how was my weekend? Bizarre. But healthy, the family was healthy, you know, have enough money to have a living room, I sit there and fun. It's New Year's. The New Year. Thanks for asking.
We just like small, like when you're in London. Yeah,
Okay, so I sent a closed message to the breakout rooms because in here it got suddenly quiet. And here's a quick trick. This has nothing to do with QM222. It's not on the midterm. It's on the exam of life. Okay. When you're asking a conference room full of people for some feedback or just chat among yourselves, let's think about it for a moment. What you can do is you can listen. And when people are talking, blah, 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 then there'll be a drop. When people are done talking and about to switch to a different conversation, like, oh, what did you do this weekend, kind of thing. So listen for the rise, and then there'll be a sudden fall. It'll only be short, maybe a second or two, as everyone sort of switches. But what I heard here was, everyone sort of stopped for a second. Okay, we're done with that. Now let's talk about something completely else. So that's how in a conference room, you know when to interject and take over again. Okay, the breakout rooms will close in 4 seconds. How about in this class? Do we have any? Way in the back, tell us your name.
I'm Isabella.
Hi, Isabella. Oh, we've talked before.
I think in first class.
Yep.
So last year I.
Isabella, for those of you who can't hear, said.
Okay. Last year I lived in Amsterdam by myself for an internship.
Hang on, just one second. Yes, because they can't hear you.
Okay.
So Isabella lived in Amsterdam on an internship last
Summer.
summer.
So my parents refused to get me an international data plan. So
Parents refused to get her an international data plan.
before I had to go to work, I'd have to memorize which tram and bus to take.
So she would log in the morning, memorize all the tram and bus routes to get to work.
And then, well, they were in Dutch, so then I'd have to remember when to get off the tram at a certain stop.
And all the instructions were in Dutch, which makes it a little difficult for Isabella. Yeah. All right, that's a classic example of first decode, right? And then memorize or remember. Go ahead, one more, and tell us your name.
My name's Kira.
Hi, Kira.
So I have cousins that live in Belgium,
Kira has a bunch of cousins who live in Belgium.
specifically little ones who most of my family speaks Spanish there, so Spanish is that.
Wait. Your family lives in Belgium, but they speak Spanish.
Because they're from Spain, but they have them.
Okay, so there's Spanish people in Belgium.
But the little cousins speak Dutch.
The little cousins speak Dutch, and they're what, 5 years old, 6?
Yeah.
5, 6.
So they'll come to me expecting me to be able to help them because I'm older, but I don't speak Dutch, so I have to learn certain words like for food, water, and toys.
So the 5 and 6-year-olds expect Isabella to act as a translator, though she doesn't really know any Dutch, so she has to memorize a few Dutch words.
So that
Okay.
I can help them out, whatever.
So first, decode, figure out what the little kids are trying to ask for, and then second, remember all the Dutch words. All right, so we have 2 examples. How about somebody online? Go ahead, Rick, you're the boss here. Feel free to send chat messages out or do anything. Steven's raising his hand. All right, let's go for somebody on the next one besides Steven, because Steven, I think, is doing great on class contribution. Go ahead, Steven.
Oh, yeah, so my example is also related to language. So let's say I'm going to another like foreign country, and then I don't know the local language. And then when I first like arrived in the airports, I will try to like recognize those signs such as like bathroom sign and like restaurant.
When you get off that plane.
Yeah, and then related the sign to the local language and try to like try to decode the language and memorize it.
Yeah,
So
excellent.
next time when I see the language, I will like know that that's a bathroom.
Go ahead, and tell us your name.
Serenity.
Serenity.
My example isn't as cool, but
Serenity says her example's not as cool, but it probably is.
I used to do a lot of puzzles as a kid.
Serenity does lots of puzzles as a kid.
So I would have to like look at the picture on the puzzle box, and then I would sort all the pieces based on color.
Oh, look at the picture on the box, sort of by color and maybe edge.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I have to like memorize where they go in the picture and what's going on in the picture.
And memorize that whole picture so that you can't keep looking back and forth at the puzzle box, right?
Yeah, it's lame.
Thank you very much, Serenity. Okay, you have a couple of other people online? Ashley, go for it.
Yeah, so mine's kind of similar. That I used to like babysit this Vietnamese family, and they didn't speak like really good English, so the kids there speak to me in like Vietnamese English mix. So I'd have to like try to like decode what they're saying, and like they would point to me, and I'd memorize a few things like foods or like what they wanted me to do in the house to like understand what they're trying to tell me.
Excellent story, Ashley. Perfect. One more, and then we'll go on. Online. Go ahead. Iris.
Hello. My example is I used to work at Starbucks, so every time like a drink order comes in, I'd have to like decode the codes that we use and then remember how to make the drink.
Excellent, excellent, Iris. That is a perfect example of decoding, remembering. All right. Hopefully you can still see the slides online. It says information transfer. We're looking at a graph. No? Yes? Anybody? Iris, can you still see the slide online?
Yes.
Okay. So there was a man named Cleveland, William Cleveland, and his co-author, Robert McGill. Cleveland kept doing a lot of this work. McGill sort of wrote the paper with Cleveland and sort of dropped off. This paper came out in 1985, and it looks really boring, but it is one of the most important papers in understanding graphs that were done. And he basically, we'll use Cleveland because this becomes known as Cleveland's taxonomy, because he wrote books and kept going on this. But lots and lots of information, and he basically said, these are the type of graphs that are easy to decode and which ones are easy to remember, okay? And here is a simple way of boosting information transfer. Always include some text telling the viewer what's happening in the graph. Even if the graph looks really simple, if it looks like a straight line going up, say it's a straight line going up. Do not assume that just because it's incredibly obvious to you what's going on in the graph is incredibly obvious to your viewer. Always tell the viewer in simple words what they should be taking away from the graph. So here's Cleveland's taxonomy, or graphical features. He said the top ones at the very high, the top of the slide, bar graphs, line graphs, and scatter plots. Those have the best information transfer. What's information transfer? Easy to decode and easy to remember. And the worst one is the one down the very bottom. It's the colored pie graph. If you want people to be able to decode and remember, never use a pie graph. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you a little table of data. I put myself at the top. Okay, I'm an egomaniac, all right? I get 66% of something. I have no idea what it is. This Fred got 8%, Cherie got 6%, Sam got 14%, Vanessa got 6%. And we're going to take this very simple table of data, and I'm going to graph it using pretty much every single type that Cleveland has on his features. And I'm not going to ask you to vote, because hopefully if you look at it and you go, yeah, I see which ones are good graphs and which ones are bad graphs. All right. We have 5 pieces of data. I'm going to show you 7 graphs. Just think about which ones are good and which ones are bad, i.e. good and bad. Easy to decode, easy to remember. 2D bar graph. Graph shows Jay got about 2/3 of the output. The other 4 people got relatively little. What you can see on this graph is I put the words right there, all right? To me, it's brilliantly obvious what's going on in the graph, but I still say it, right? People are like, oh, okay, I get it. Because maybe you get it, but you don't think about the 2/3. Maybe you think, oh, Jay got a lot. So by putting in 2/3, I'm telling you exactly what I want you to think about. Here's 3D charts and 3D areas. Let me ask somebody online who doesn't participate a lot. Can somebody raise their hand who just wants to answer yes or no? Rithvik has to help me out here. Somebody who just needs a little bit of class contribution here. Moran? Moran, go for it. Okay. Are you off mute? Here's the simple question. Do those look really cool? Does the bottom one kind of look like a roller coaster?
Yeah, it does.
It does. Excellent job. Give him full class contribution, okay? It looks cool, but is it easy to figure out that Jay has 2/3 of the bottom one? What do you think, Moran?
No.
No. That's the problem. It looks great. Everyone's like, whoa, Moran, you're an amazing graphic artist. But 10 minutes from now, no one knows what the data were. So they think you're cool, Moran, or they think you have great technique, but you didn't transfer the information. Thank you very much, Moran. You're off the hook. Unless you want to participate more. Should I use pie charts? Well, on here I say almost never, but there is a keyword almost. Pie charts look great. Don't they look fantastic? The problem is no one can visually figure out how big a pie slice is. Why? Because one part of the pie slice is fat, the other part of the pie slice is skinny. So your brain is trying to figure out, oh, do I compare the fat parts? Do I compare the skinny parts? Do I compare halfway? I don't know. They look great. They attract attention, which is why you see them all over the place. But no one can tell you, if I didn't show you that table in the beginning, you'd be like, I don't know. The bottom pie chart, if you're going to use it, is a regular pie chart. Use that instead of the exploding pie chart at the top. Look at the exploding pie chart at the top. Do you know what the heck's going on? No, that's the problem. It's really good, but I don't know which part goes with which and what. It's taking you forever to decode. And even after you decode it, you don't get a lot of information from it. Should I go on to the next one? Go ahead.
Right now, none of the graphs we look at have had titles or titles for axes labels. So if they were to have axes and labels, wouldn't that?
Axes and labels will increase information transfer, but even with that, on this pie chart, it's still not going to help a lot. Let me show you the next slide with axes and labels. And the next one is called a radar. Top left corner. I have no idea. You look at it, you go, wow, this is a very interesting graph. I have given this particular graph for 7 years now. I still have no idea what's going on in the top left corner. Same data, all I did is I changed in Microsoft Excel the type of graph to radar. I sat through about a year ago a presentation where someone showed a whole bunch of these radar graphs. At the end of the hour, I was like, what a waste of my time. I got nothing out of it besides being confused. And the last one is donut graphs. I love donuts. My personal favorite is the Boston cream and Dunkin', okay? I'm sorry, it doesn't have a hole in it. It's got the cream inside. No hole, but can you tell anything? No. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you. Don't use pie graphs unless you're trying to confuse your audience. Occasionally, you do want to confuse your audience, okay? There are times where you don't want your audience to really get information. You're like, how do I confuse these people and just sort of slide over it? I once worked on a very large government project. I had a very tiny, small piece of it, and the project was not doing well at all. And the person who was responsible for most of the project needed to make a presentation of how the project was going. If that person had made some simple graphs, the people in the room who were paying for this project would have said immediately, stop the project, we're wasting millions of dollars. But this person was in too deep. So they came in with all kind of weird graphs, tangents, lots of data, flash, 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 numbers, this, boom, bam, boom. And after an hour, everyone was like, whoa, we don't know what's going on, but boy, you're spending our money. Great, keep going. And I'm sitting in the back, and I had known what was going on ahead of time going, that was the greatest sleight of hand I've ever seen. Because by presenting an overwhelming amount of data in a confusing fashion, rapid pace, saying, we're doing this, nobody had the ability to actually sit back, think, or even understand what was going on. And they all went, great progress report, lunchtime, let's go on to some other problem, okay? Because it didn't look like a problem to them. So sometimes you'd like to use the worst information transfer. In general in business, you don't. In general in business, you want to be clear, succinct, and get your point across. Most of the time. Do you need a chart or a table? When should you graph? When should you put information in table form? Do you expect people to look up values, compare values, precisely know things, or use it as a reference? Always use a table. don't use a chart or a graph. I think I've told you a bunch of times, I spend a lot of time bicycling. I have a bunch of different wheels. I need to know precisely, is this a tire I filled 100 pounds, 105, 110? You know, I need to know exact numbers. Don't show me a graph. I need a table that says this type of wheel gets exactly this pressure. I need to know precise numbers. Other things, show me a graph. I'm just looking for a general idea. Okay? You want to use a general impression, graph it. You want to provide very specific numbers, put it in a table. Here's some big picture ideas. By the way, that was a joke for those of you who've been to Paris to the Louvre, which is where the Mona Lisa is not hiding, it's in full public display. The Mona Lisa is a tiny painting. Okay, so this is a joke slide for those of you who've been to Paris. For those of you who haven't been to Paris, you'll be like, oh, Mona Lisa, it's tiny. Okay. Most graphic software creates default graphs. Excel is graphic software. And these default graphs need to be improved. Here is, on one version of Excel, the default graph for profits. Okay, there's a file called profits. I'm going to show you this exact same data graphed a number of different ways. First, don't use the default. Why? It says profits, profits. Am I stupid, stupid? Yes, yes. Don't repeat, don't repeat. Okay? Pretty straightforward. I then spent a number of hours trying to improve this. I put in the marble Carrera background. Look at that background. Isn't that a beautiful marble background? I used an exceptionally beautiful font, kind of a swirly font, very cursive. I made sure that every line had a data point. Okay? And if you actually look carefully at this on a high resolution screen, I used 3D shadowing on every line with a light touch of blush in color. I spent an incredible amount of time on this graph. Let me ask you a simple question. Are profits going up or down? Up, down, up. I don't know. What happened is I worked so hard to impress you, I lost the simple idea of trying to show what's going on in the information. So yes, Excel allows you to do all kind of fancy stuff. But the fancy stuff doesn't necessarily allow you to convey information. Good graphs express, they don't impress. Here is the exact same graph done in a very simple, minimalistic point of view. Profits. Are they going up, down, or are they staying the same? Vote of hands online, just raise your blue hand. Up. 5 people. 6, 3. Up. 2. Almost no one thinks they're going up. Excellent. Down. All right, we have overwhelming support for down and only a few people for up. That's pretty much what I think is going on. Okay? Thank you very much for raising your blue hands. So basically, try and make it really simple and straightforward. A couple of rules when creating graphs. Oh. Some people are like, okay, he's telling us this stuff. Are we ever going to get quizzed on this? On these particular slides, you are not going to see it on the midterm or final. But on these particular slides, you have to do project part A and project part B. You have to produce a project. And people are like, how do I get any on the project? I'm like, go back and look at the slideshow. So are you getting graded on this particular slide, deck? Yes, in your project. Are you seeing it on the midterm? No. Is that clear? Surrounding? Great.
Yeah.
Rules. Sometimes you're required to produce a lot of graphs, like 200 or 300. You know, it's a big annual report, and you've got to stick in, you know, it's a 300-page report, and you've got to stick in 125 graphs. And after you've done like 50 graphs, you're like, I'm bored. I want to change the graphing type because I'm just sick and tired of looking at all these graphs. Let me just mix things up. Don't. Pick 1 or 2 types and stick with it, even if you have to produce 1,000 graphs. Why? Because once your audience decodes the first 1 or 2, they can easily decode all the rest. If after 50 graphs out of your 125, you're like, oh, let me change the style up entirely, someone's blazing through the report going, I'm looking for some information, and they're like, oh, I have to stop and start decoding a whole new type. Make it easy, even if you're bored. Be consistent. 1 or 2 graph types and stay with it. Use the same font, colors, background, and shape. For example, if you're doing a whole bunch of gender work, men versus women, okay? I'm not saying men are dots and women are solid, okay? Yes, women, you are solid, okay? But in general, whatever you decide, stay with those. So if men are dots on slide 1, and you have 75 slides, men are dots all the way through all 75 slides. Women are solid all the way through all 75 slides. Feel free to reverse them. I don't care. Just be consistent. Don't use graphs to show just a few numbers. Basically, if you have 2 numbers to graph, you're saying to people, I have nothing to say, I'm trying to fill up space. You remember back in like 7th grade or 6th grade where someone assigned you, please write a 5-page essay, and some kid, maybe it was you, or it was definitely me, passed in an essay written in giant font, like, you know, each letter was an inch, and the teacher sort of rolled his eyes and said, Jay, come on, how many words do you have here? And I was like, 35. You got 35 words in 7 pages. I said, yeah, it was really cool using those big letters, weren't they? They're like, no, go back and rewrite it again, all right? So basically, by putting in graphs that have like just 2 numbers in it, you're saying I have nothing to say and I'm trying to fill up space. Don't exaggerate trends by skipping 0. Conversely, don't minimize trends by not skipping 0. And it's a kind of art here, you know. So just try not to distort the data. Sometimes you get rid of it, sometimes you don't. It's a little hard. Don't change labels mid-axis. Don't use misleading units of measurements, ounces instead of gallons. This is I really wish I could still find the original clipping. I photocopied it a long time ago. This is an old one. It says the Soarway Post, the daily paper New Yorkers trust. This is back when people used to read physical papers when they were commuting into New York on like the subway trains and on the commuter rails, things like that. And there was the news. The news was more for Long Island. And the Post, which was more of us, you know, people in like Queens and Brooklyn and things like that used to read it. Yes, I know Queens part of Rhode Island, part of Long Island. Let's not go there, okay? Anyways, what you look at is, if you take a quick look at the graph, it suggests that the 2 lines are connecting, and they're going to connect real soon. But if we look at the data, what we see here is we see 1.9 million up here, 1.8 million, 1.6, 1.55, and so on. And these numbers are like 600,000 and end at 722,000. So what happens is these numbers are half as big, and there's a huge gap between these 2. But because they actually jump here, it says 600,000, 700,000, 800,000, 1.5 million, without any break in the axes. They're basically saying, oh, these 2 lines are coming together. But they're not, because the graph is trying to fool you. Don't skip years. Some of you read the Wall Street Journal. Others of you should be reading the Wall Street Journal if you're a business student. The Wall Street Journal does this. They did it last week. They did it 3 weeks ago. They do it all the time. They'll show you, especially when they're talking about commodities, like gold, silver, platinum, these kind of things. They'll show you 1980, 1990, 2000, 2005, 2010, then 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all with the exact same spacing. The first gap is 10 years, the second gap is 10 years, and then it goes 1 year. Total distortion. Here's some distortions from Fox News. It shows federal welfare received in the United States on the left-hand side. If you look at the graph, it is going up at a tremendous rate. But what you'll notice if you look really carefully, and I'll leave this for you, they basically dropped the axis up to 0, and these are relatively small increments. Welfare has only gone up, I don't know, I don't remember the exact numbers, but only about 4 or 5% over time. But they've distorted it by making the axis so far away so that it looks like a relatively small increase is now magnified. If the Bush tax cuts expire, it basically shows top tax rate. This looks really low, this looks really high, but once again, there's really not much mathematically different between the two, but they're trying to exaggerate trends. This is one from the Wall Street Journal. And let me just show you real quick. The gap between 1 and 3 is how big? I don't know, quarter of an inch, whatever it is. There's some size gap between 1 and 3 months. So this gap here is 2 months. The next gap is 3 months long. It's about the same size gap. Let's look at the gap between 1 and 3 months. How big is it? The exact same gap between 5 and 10 years. And then a 20-year gap is only about 1.5 times as big as the gap over here of 2 months. There is no mathematical transformation that I have ever figured out that can explain how you go from 1, 3, 6 to 30 years in that kind of scale. I mean, maybe there is, but I still haven't been able to find it. Area. Think about houses. I don't know how many of you have ever driven by in the suburbs where they're doing a lot of tear downs. And they tear down a small house and they put up a mega mansion, and they put up another mega mansion right beside it. And you see these massive houses, but they're almost touching. And you're like, dude, what are you thinking? Give a little space, you know? It's a mega mansion. At least you have like more than 10 feet between you and the next person. I once went up to visit a professor friend in Toronto. We got there really late at night, and they said, "Oh, you have, the guest room and the guest bathroom." And I was like, yeah, "Okay." Fell asleep. Woke up in the bathroom in the morning. I didn't wake up in the bathroom. Woke up, went to the bathroom, and I opened the window, and I almost hit the house next door because I opened the window a little too fast. I was like, "What?" This house was just massive, and they built this other house so that the 2 bathroom windows would smash if both people opened it at the same time. Conversely, have you ever seen these little tiny houses on this massive plot of land? Yeah, I've seen some. They look kind of like golf shacks, and it's on like 10 acres. It's like, and the 10 acres are all manicured. It's like, no, you need a big house here. Same thing with grass, okay? You need a little bit of water, like 20%, but not too much. Here's an example. You look at on the very bottom, wow, we're wasting all this space. This is pretty good. We get a little bit of white space. We're not too crowded, but we're not like wasting a huge amount of yard here. So the goal is, I can't tell you the exact number, but there's a nice ratio. A couple of common questions. What shape should my graph be? Your shape should almost never be round or triangular or something like that. It should almost always be a rectangle. And you have a choice between portrait and landscape. And what is the dimensions of portrait versus landscape? The ratio should be 1.62. So it depends which direction you're in. Why? Because if you don't use that ratio, graphs look really weird, right? You look at that, you go, what's going on here? Or, right? It's just people look at it and go, huh? If you make a graph that is about the right ratio, oh, I don't think I have it. There it is. If you make it using the right ratio, people go, yep, I get it. Makes sense to me. But when it's too skinny or too wide, it just looks strange. And the whole goal is for people to look at your graphs and go, I understand what's going on. And what's the ratio? It's 1.62. So there's a whole slide here for those of you who are interested in the math, where you can figure out exactly the size. But it's pretty straightforward. Take any intro drawing class and we'll talk about the golden ratio. Should you use grid lines? If people are trying to see very specific points, use grid lines. If they're not trying to see specific points, don't use grid lines. Don't go overboard on grid lines. I have a graph down here on the bottom, the same profit graph, with both horizontal and vertical grid lines. We have trapped the data. No, let me out, okay? Don't go overboard on grid lines. Grid lines Really useful for showing when there's monthly data, to separate actual from projected, to show when methods change, or to allow people to estimate very particular points. Should you use labels and messages? Don't use labels and messages unless you have something really important to say. CEO died, CFO died, customer died. Boom, boom, boom. Okay? Other than that, there's no reason for putting numbers next to every single data point. Why? If you're putting numbers next to every single data point, you should use a table, not a graph. I mean, if it's so important to every point, just put it in a table. Graphs are there to give impressions, which is why labels at every single data point is not an impression. Put labels on the horizontal and vertical axis unless the axis is really, really clear. So one of the most common mistakes that students do is they put day, month, and year. And it always says something like January 15th and then the year. January 15th, January 15th. Okay, we got it. January 15th. You don't need to show it 30 times. Just put the year there. Line graphs. Most common thing in business is line graphs. Make sure your line has at least 5 data points. Less than 5 data points, use a table. If you have too many lines, split it up. So what we have here is we have 8 lines. Do you have any idea what's going on in this graph? I don't think anyone does. Okay? Split it up into 2 different graphs so that people have a better idea of what's going on. Because otherwise, it just looks like a blob. Sometimes think if your line graph needs some kind of adjustment. Maybe you have change in population. Maybe you have inflation. I don't know. Here's an example. A lot of people believe that the Dow Jones Industrial Average basically always goes up if you're a long-term investor. I don't know if you've ever heard that. Invest in the stock market. Yes, the graph shows the Dow always goes up if you're willing to hold on for at least 4 or 5 years. But the graph is a lie. Why is the graph a lie? Because they never adjust for inflation. Adjust for inflation? Oh yeah. Purchasing power? The graph does not always go up. Long-term investor means you have to live to be about 100. Then you always make your money. Can't guarantee you're going to live to be 100. So that's not really that useful. What do you do about zeros? Use as few as possible. So under format axis, the display units, you can get rid of zeros. You can turn everything into millions just by clicking a little button in Excel. Makes it simple. Dates. Do you really need day or month? No, just get rid of it. So in conclusion, and I saw 1 minute left, making an effective graph takes time because you have to sort of strip things down and get to the basic component parts, the inner core, the inner beauty of numbers. And it's pretty simple. Ask somebody after you've created the graph, tell me, what does this graph say? If they can look at the graph quickly, decode it, remember it, and explain it back to you, you did a great graph, pat yourself on the shoulder, go get a cup of coffee, or tea, or milk, or beer, or whatever you drink, okay? If they look at it for more than 40 seconds, they don't even have to say anything. You failed. You need to go back, simplify it, make it clear. Thank you very much. I'll stay online and answer any kind of questions. But otherwise, I look forward to seeing some of you in person on Wednesday and the rest of you on Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Bye.